The night was thick with tension as the guests gathered in the dimly lit woods. Nastijo, a young man spurned by love, had planned this elaborate banquet with a dark purpose. The guests, elegantly dressed and chatting among themselves, were unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. At the center of it all sat the Traversari girl, the woman Nastijo loved but who had cruelly rejected him. She and her family were positioned directly opposite the spot where the terrifying events would take place. Suddenly, a shrill cry cut through the air, and the guests fell silent. From the shadows emerged a terrified young girl, her clothes torn and her body trembling. She was pursued by a knight, his face twisted with rage. The knight caught up to the girl, and in a horrific display of violence, he viciously disemboweled her. As the guests watched in horror, wild dogs tore apart her viscera. The knight, his voice cold and unyielding, narrated the gruesome act, detailing the eternal punishment for the girl's lack of compassion. The sight was too much for the Traversari girl to bear. Shaken and realizing the gravity of the lesson, she turned to the company and announced, "I will be pleased to become Nastijo's wife." The next Sunday, a magnificent wedding banquet was held, and the couple, now willing, were married. Their union was celebrated with grandeur, but the memory of the night in the woods lingered, a haunting reminder of the price of cruelty and the reward of compassion. In the bustling city of Florence, marriage was more than just a union of love. It was a strategic alliance that could elevate one's social and economic status. For the elite families, it was a game of wealth and honor, with dowries and trousseaus as the currency of exchange. Mothers like Alessandra Macinghi Strozzi were adept at navigating this market, carefully selecting potential brides for their sons based on a combination of beauty, dowry, and lineage. The wedding process was a complex affair, involving legal contracts, elaborate trousseaus, and grand celebrations that spanned multiple days. For the newlyweds, the wedding night was not a private affair but a public duty. The consummation of the marriage was a collective concern, and the newlyweds were often under the watchful eyes of their families and the community. In the nuptial bedchamber, richly decorated with family heraldry and adorned with cassoni luxurious wedding chests filled with seductive images, newlyweds were reminded of their marital obligations. The Rucellai-Medici wedding, one of the most opulent in Florence, was a testament to the power and wealth of the two families. Giovanni Rucellai, a shrewd matchmaker, had arranged the union of his son Bernardo with Lucrezia, the granddaughter of Cosimo de' Medici. The three-day festivities, held in the piazza in front of the newly completed Palazzo Rucellai, were a spectacle of grandeur. An enormous triangular stage, decorated with the entwined coats of arms of the Rucellai and Medici families, hosted over 500 guests. The meals, prepared by 50 cooks, were a feast of excess, with mountains of bread, poultry, seafood, and wine served on gold and silver platters. Lucrezia, the gushing bride, was dressed in the finest gowns, her trousseau a treasure trove of luxurious fabrics and jewels. Each piece of her dowry was meticulously recorded by Giovanni, a symbol of the Medici family's wealth and the Rucellai's newfound status. The wedding of Lucrezia and Bernardo was a union that would shape the future of both families, a testament to the power of strategic alliances in Renaissance Florence. In the bustling city of Florence, the marriage between Nannina de' Medici and Bernardo Rucellai was more than a union of two individuals. It was a strategic alliance between two powerful families. For years, seamstresses and embroiderers worked tirelessly to create a trousseau that would not only reflect Nannina's status, but also showcase the wealth and influence of the Medici family. The fabrics used were rich and diverse, from fine linens to luxurious velvets, each piece meticulously crafted to convey both beauty and prestige. Nannina's wardrobe was a testament to her family's affluence. Her dresses and gowns were made from the finest materials, such as a rich blue satin gown with brocade sleeves, a white dress with striped damask sleeves, and a purplish blue cloth dress with silver silk sleeves. Each piece was designed to highlight her beauty and status, and the extensive trousseau included everything from elaborate caps to intricate jewelry, such as a Virgin Mary pendant and a string of coral with silver and pearls. The transfer of these items from the Medici household to the Rucellai palace was a grand affair. Wooden crates and leather cases filled with Nannina's belongings were carried through the streets of Florence, past the iconic Duomo and baptistery, and finally to Palazzo Rucellai on Via della Vigna Nuova. The arrival of these items was a visual display of the Medici's wealth, and the unpacking process involved dozens of servants working diligently to organize and prepare Nannina's new living space. However, the significance of these items extended beyond their material value. Nannina's trousseau was a symbolic statement, communicating her identity, her family's status, and the expectations placed upon her as she transitioned from a Medici bride to a Rucellai wife and daughter-in-law. The bright purple pearl embroidered gown, for example, not only showcased her elegance, but also the power and influence of her father, Lorenzo de' Medici. When Nannina wore this gown in her new home, it was a reminder of her lineage and the alliances that came with it. Giovanni Rucellai, Bernardo's father, was equally invested in the marriage. He provided a substantial counter-dowry, including gowns of white velvet embroidered with pearls, silk, and gold, and a variety of other luxurious items. The Rucellai family's gifts were meant to match the Medici's offerings, ensuring that the union was seen as a partnership of equals. Giovanni's investments in the marriage were not just financial, but also political. Through this alliance, he gained access to the Medici's extensive network, which helped him secure prestigious political positions and social standing. The wedding was a lavish affair, and the expense did not go unnoticed. Some, like the Florentine Chancellor Leonardo Bruni, criticized the extravagance, but for Giovanni, the cost was a shrewd investment in his family's future. The marriage marked the end of the Rucellai family's isolation, and opened new doors for political and social advancement. Giovanni's pride in this alliance was evident in the design of his palace, where he incorporated Medici emblems into the facade, symbolizing the union of the two families. For Nannina, however, the transition was more complex. While her new possessions and the grandeur of her trousseau were a source of pride, they also represented the constraints of her new role. In a letter, she expressed her frustration with the limitations imposed by her gender and the expectations of her position. "Oh, do not be born a woman if you want your own way." Despite the opulence of her new life, Nannina faced the challenges of adapting to a new family and a new set of responsibilities. Bernardo, on the other hand, was still in the process of maturing into his role as a husband and future patriarch. The upbringing of young men of the mercantile elite was a carefully orchestrated affair, aimed at shaping them into responsible and respectable heirs. Fathers like Giovanni and Lorenzo de' Medici took great care to ensure that their sons would uphold the family's reputation and continue the family business. This included not only education, but also the inculcation of proper manners and conduct, as detailed in treatises like Giovanni della Casa's Galateo. The pressure to perform was intense, and both fathers and sons felt the weight of these expectations. Alberti's advice in On the Family emphasized the importance of raising sons to be obedient and capable, warning that poor character in a son reflected poorly on the father. Giovanni Rucellai, who had experienced the challenges of growing up fatherless, was particularly attentive to his son's development. He envisioned a close and harmonious relationship with his sons, where they would transition from obedient children to respected partners and eventually take over the family's responsibilities. In this context, the marriage of Nannina and Bernardo was not just a personal union, but a strategic alliance that carried significant social and political implications. The trousseau and counter-dowry were more than just collections of beautiful items. They were symbols of the complex dynamics of power, status, and family legacy in Renaissance Florence. In the Florentine society of the 15th century, the Rucellai family was a powerhouse, and Giovanni Rucellai, the Patriarch, was a man of great ambition. He believed deeply in the Neoplatonic philosophy of Marsilio Ficino, which emphasized the divine nature of the father and the obedient role of the son. For Rucellai, the family home was a sacred space, a reflection of the divine order. However, his sons, Pandolfo and Bernardo, had different ideas, and their actions would challenge the ideal union Rucellai so fervently upheld. Pandolfo, the elder son, was initially a dutiful heir. He married well, managed the family business, and served in various political roles. However, beneath his obedient exterior, Pandolfo was a man of deep spiritual conflict. He struggled with the worldly responsibilities of banking and politics, which he found at odds with his growing religious convictions. Despite his efforts to serve his father and the family, Pandolfo's inner turmoil only grew. When his wife died after 8 years of marriage, He saw it as a sign to pursue a more spiritual path. Inspired by the teachings of the Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola, Pandolfo left the family home and joined the convent of San Marco, renouncing his name and wealth to become Brother Santi. He spent his remaining years writing tracts against the evils of usury and other banking practices, ultimately dying in 1497. Bernardo, the younger son, was a stark contrast to his brother. Favored by his father, Bernardo was given a humanist education and encouraged to pursue his interests in literature and philosophy. He was a frequent visitor in the court of Lorenzo de' Medici, where he thrived as a man of letters. However, Bernardo's erudition came with a hefty dose of arrogance. He was described as a modest, impatient, and ambitious, traits that made him feel constrained by his position at the family home. After his marriage to Nannina de' Medici, Bernardo and his new wife moved to the family's estate at Coracchi, a retreat known for its relaxed and carefree atmosphere. There, Bernardo indulged in a lifestyle of pleasure and freedom, even fathering an illegitimate son, Tommaso, who would later become known for his eccentricities. Coracchi, or Lo Specchio, was a world apart from the rigid urban environment of Florence. The estate was a playground of whimsical architecture and lush gardens, where the strict social codes of the city were relaxed. Giovanni, the father, had designed the estate to be a place of license and delight, in line with the architectural theories of Leon Battista Alberti. Bernardo and Nannina took full advantage of this freedom, hosting elaborate parties and living a life. Bernardo's time at Coracchi was marked by a sense of rebellion against the strictures of his father's world. He saw himself as a collection of fragments, a man who could not be contained by the expectations of his family. This sense of self was perhaps a reflection of the mirror stage described by Jacques Lacan, where the external image one sees in a mirror is at odds with the internal, fragmented self. Bernardo's actions, from his departure from the family home to his indulgent lifestyle at Coracchi, were a symbolic breaking of the rules and a rejection of his father's ideals. Nannina, too, embraced the freedom of Coracchi. Her excessive lifestyle was immortalized in a satirical poem by Luigi Pulci, which detailed the extravagant preparations required for a fete at the estate. The poem humorously listed an array of cosmetics, cures, and decorations, painting a picture of a world where the elite could indulge in every whim without the restraints of city life. Nannina and her companions were free to dress up, gossip, and enjoy themselves, a stark contrast to the more rigid and controlled environment of the Rucellai family home in Florence. Through their actions, both Pandolfo and Bernardo challenged the Neoplatonic ideal of the family as a reflection of divine order. While Pandolfo sought a life of spiritual purity, Bernardo embraced a life of worldly pleasure. Their paths, though different, both represented a break from the expectations of their father and the world he represented. In the end, the Rucellai family, once a symbol of unity and order, became a microcosm of the broader societal changes and personal struggles of the 15th century. In the bustling world of Renaissance Florence, the Rucellai family, once at the peak of their wealth and influence, found themselves facing a daunting turn of fate. Giovanni Rucellai, the Patriarch, had spent lavishly on grand buildings and extravagant weddings, but by the 1470s his fortune had dwindled, and he was on the brink of bankruptcy. The collapse of his banking ventures left him with a staggering loss of 20,000 florins, a sum that threatened to undo everything he had built. Giovanni's financial troubles forced the family to sell their prized properties, including the beautiful villa at Coracchi, which held deep sentimental value. Despite these setbacks, Giovanni remained determined to salvage what he could, especially the family's reputation. He advised his sons to adopt a more practical approach, embracing their mercantile roots and focusing on maintaining what they had rather than pursuing new heights of luxury. The family's financial strain brought them all back under one roof at the Palazzo Rucellai. Giovanni, his wife Icopa, their sons Pandolfo and Bernardo, along with their families and servants, all lived together in the crowded palace. For Bernardo, this arrangement was particularly confining. He had always been a man of ambition and vision, and the emotional and physical closeness of the family was stifling. He longed for a place of his own, a sanctuary where he could pursue his interests in peace. In 1481, Giovanni's death provided Bernardo with the opportunity he needed. With the support of his influential Medici in-laws, he acquired an abandoned property on the outskirts of Florence, a former leprosy hospital. Bernardo transformed this humble site into the Orti Oricellari, a magnificent garden estate that served as both a retreat and a hub of intellectual activity. The Orti, as it came to be known, was a carefully designed space that combined the beauty of a country villa with the conveniences of city life. It featured a spacious house with elegant loggias, a garden planted with classical species, and a collection of busts of famous figures from history and literature. The Orti quickly became a gathering place for some of the most brilliant minds of the Renaissance. Scholars, philosophers, and artists flocked to Bernardo's estate, drawn by his hospitality and the unique atmosphere of the garden. The discussions here ranged from ancient history and literature to contemporary political issues. Bernardo himself contributed to these debates with his writings, including a topographical study of ancient Rome and a critique of the French invasion of Italy. However, the political climate in Florence became increasingly turbulent. The death of Lorenzo de' Medici in 1492 marked the end of an era, and the city fell into a period of instability. Savonarola's radical reforms and the subsequent Republican government led by Piero Soderini were far from what Bernardo, a staunch Medici loyalist, supported. Disillusioned and frustrated, he chose to leave Florence in 1506, traveling to cities like Avignon, Marseille, and Venice before returning in 1511, just as the Medici were about to reclaim power. Upon his return, the Orti Oricellari once again became a center of intellectual activity, but with a new generation of thinkers. Bernardo's grandson, Cosimo di Cosimo, continued the tradition of hosting gatherings, though the focus shifted to the vernacular language and the merits of democratic government. The Orti also saw the development of the madrigal, a new form of secular music, and the first performance of a significant Italian tragedy. But the idyllic atmosphere of the Orti was not to last. In 1522, a failed assassination plot against Cardinal Giulio de' Medici led to the execution of a prominent member of the garden fraternity, and the gatherings came to an abrupt end. The Orti then became a more private and sometimes controversial space, where scientific experiments and more decadent activities took place. One notable event was a dissection of a conjoined twin, described in detail by Benedetto Varchi in his treatise on monsters. The twins, a pair of girls, were a subject of both scientific curiosity and artistic fascination. The dissection was attended by Palazzo Rucellai and other physicians and artists, including the Mannerist painter Bronzino. The unique and tragic nature of this event added another layer to the rich and complex history of the Orti Oricellari, a place that had been a refuge, a salon, and a laboratory of ideas. The story of the Orti Oricellari and Palazzo Rucellai weaves through centuries, each thread adding a layer to the rich tapestry of Florentine history. From the garden where a mysterious dissection took place in 1536 to the eerie necromancer's performance in 1578, the space has always been a stage for the extraordinary. The garden, once a place of intellectual retreat, became a backdrop for the debauchery of Cardinal Giancarlo in the 17th century, with the statue of Polyphemus standing as a symbol of excess. Palazzo Rucellai, meanwhile, stood as a testament to the family's legacy, but its divisions over the years reflected the changing fortunes of its inhabitants. Giovanni Rucellai's will, intended to preserve the palace within the family, ultimately led to its fragmentation. Bernardo, the younger son, initially reluctant to claim his share, finally returned to the palazzo in 1511, using it as a platform for his political ambitions. His homecoming was marked by grand celebrations, but his reign was brief, ending with his death in 1514. The palace continued to change hands, each new owner leaving their mark. The divisions of 1531 further altered the structure, with the once unified space becoming a patchwork of individual claims. The cortile, with its well and decorative emblems, and the loggia, remained common ground, but the private rooms were reconfigured to suit the needs of the new occupants. In more recent times, the palace and its garden have taken on new roles. The Orti Oricellari, once a site of secret gatherings and scandal, has been restored, its columns now girdled with metal, a blend of penitentiary and sensual. The palazzo, too, has seen its share of modern occupants, each adding to its storied history. For the author, the experience of living in Palazzo Rucellai was a mix of indulgence and challenge. The house, with its silent nights and grand courtyards, offered moments of beauty and reflection. But it also demanded discipline, as seen in the incident with the broken key and the strict rules of the Contessa. The author, distracted by the allure of travel and the company of Lorenzo il Magnifico, found it difficult to maintain focus on their research. The barista's curious question and the expired Wi-Fi password served as reminders of the time lost. Determined to get back on track, the author resumed their work, but new distractions inevitably arose. The palazzo, with its long history of transformation, seemed to echo the author's own journey of adapting, evolving, and finding a place in a world rich with layers of the past. The story of Palazzo Rucellai and the Orti Oricellari is not just a tale of stone and garden, but of the people who have shaped and been shaped by these spaces, a cycle of change that continues to unfold.